Okay, hey, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joe Comps. I'm a cyber threat analyst here at Vali Cyber, and today I'm really excited to talk to you all about hypervisor ransomware protection and a little bit of what we do here at Vali Cyber, as well as talking a bit about some attacks that we've seen recently targeting hypervisors specifically. So first off, Vali Cyber was founded in 2020 and with the design to create effective and efficient security solutions for unprotected and underprotected critical infrastructure, specifically hypervisors. Now, we started off in Linux security kind of as the specialty, but after a period of time, we realized that the skills and the applications of the product that we had could transfer pretty readily over to hypervisors, and there was definitely a significant security gap in that specific sector of the industry. And so, we realized that our product fit kind of perfectly into that gap and solved a lot of solutions that people were coming up against. And so, you may ask, like, okay, well, why hypervisors? Why is that such a big deal? And the honest answer is, we're seeing a lot of attacks recently. In fact, there's been an exponential increase over the past 3 years in ESXi attacks specifically. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but we're seeing global brands such as, Panera, Omni Hotels, Mark Spencer's, and a bunch of different industries are getting targeted. In fact, we're even seeing that some state actors and APTs are on the rise, attacking entities such as Florida Supreme Court, MITRE, and there's a few reasons why attackers are starting to pivot, more towards targeting hypervisors and specifically ESXi. Now, one of those reasons is that it is a very devastating blast radius. Whenever an attacker is able to successfully compromise an ESXi host, there's a number of cascading effects that occur, one of those being financial. In fact, when you look at some of the ransomware requests that have occurred or the follow-on legal issues and stuff like that with entities like Johnson Controls or MGM, Resorts, it's multi-millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in cost, cleanup fees, follow-on legal costs as well. In fact, the recent Marks and Spencer's attack is estimated right now to cost around, $402 million, which if you look at their annual profits as of last year, that's about half of their annual profits. So, we're seeing that just compromising a few hypervisor hosts themselves can have huge cascading effects. On top of that, another reason that attackers like to target it is that there's regularly CVEs or vulnerabilities that are coming out that are targeting ESXi. Specifically, earlier this year in March, there were 3 CVEs that we'll talk about a little bit later that were kind of a chain of 0 days that were very effective in targeting ESXi, resulting in a virtual machine escape. And then finally, we're starting to see a little bit more industry recognition with, MITRE attack, their framework, releasing the new version 17 framework, has a whole matrix that specifically focuses on ESXi and the techniques that attackers use to target ESXi. So it's kind of high time that ESXi needs a runtime security solution. Another reason that attackers do like to target it is it's no secret that VMware and Broadcom make up 84%, the preponderance of the market share of ESXi itself. So when attackers are creating and crafting these malware, what they'll do is they want to get the most bang for their buck. So they're going to create malware that specifically is targeting something that they know can be implemented in multiple different targets, multiple different industries, and that is malware that targets ESXi. So that's kind of the why behind it. But now we're going to dive a little bit into the how. And how these breaches typically start on a hypervisor is usually one or a combination of 3 things, right? You can have credential compromise, and that could be stolen. It could be, purchased from an initial access broker site. It could occur from, Active Directory compromise or lateral movement. Could be something like social engineering. Maybe, an employee clicks on a phishing link, or, they answer a phone call and give information maybe they shouldn't. On top of that, if an organization doesn't have multi-factor authentication in place, it makes it a lot easier to utilize those credentials that attackers will get. Another thing that we tend to see is misconfiguration, whether it's secure boot being disabled or SSH is enabled in an environment, or just improper firewall rules, things of that nature. Those tend to compound with other issues like a stolen credential. And finally, as I talked about a little bit earlier, there's vulnerabilities that are regularly coming out, a couple of which we'll demonstrate. Right now, there's about 117 that are known vulnerabilities, but the problem is, attackers are very advanced and they spend so much time doing this that there's a high probability of unknown vulnerabilities that exist out there, i.e. specifically 0 days, that the vendor currently may not be aware of, that attackers can utilize during these ransomware campaigns. So, when it comes to defenses, right, or traditional defenses, a lot of times we get questions about firewalls specifically. And they say, well, why do we need runtime solution if we have a firewall in place? Well, the unfortunate reality is that, firewalls just aren't enough. It's good to have. We're not saying you shouldn't have firewalls. You absolutely should. But predominantly firewalls focus on north and south traffic, i.e. things that are kind of coming into the environment. And they don't really look at anything that's going on already within the environment or your east to west movement. So things like SSH misuse, credential abuse, anything like that typically will go undetected, or even advanced threats can mask certain traffic with legitimate services such as like DNS, SNMTP, etc. So they find a way of, once they gain that initial access, they'll kind of blend it in the traffic, and a firewall is virtually useless there. Another thing is that firewalls themselves can actually be attacked, and what we're seeing is a lot more recently. Just like there's vulnerabilities coming out for ESXi, pick your name brand firewall, and there's vulnerabilities coming out for that thing as well. So whether or not an attacker decides to use a technique that they can just sort of bypass or blend their traffic in from the firewall, or specifically using tools that have crafted exploits that target that firewall itself and actually uses the firewall as a jump off point into the rest of the network, unfortunately, it's not a wise decision to rely on that single control point, because inevitably it can become a single point of failure. An example I like to use is that within your house you can have the best state-of-the-art locks, but they don't do you really any good if you leave the keys to those locks underneath the floor mat in the back door. So in the case of our graphic here, the keys being credential compromised, right? If you have a payroll employee that unfortunately gets social engineered via phishing link or something like that, and they give up their credentials, well, now it doesn't matter what your firewall is, because you have those keys underneath the floor mat, and someone can just take that and immediately get into your house and access your environment. So that's kind of what happened in this next attack, or the attack that we're going to talk about here, which is the MGM Grand attack. Now, many of you may remember this. It happened in October 2023 when the MGM Grand resorts out in Las Vegas got compromised, and it resulted in over $100 million loss to that organization. Now, in this attack, it's a little bit complex, but we're going to try and break it down in simplistic terms. But it kind of further illustrates the point that, the attackers aren't going to use one single vector or one single method to compromise the environment. We're going to see through this conversation here how they use multiple different techniques. So it doesn't make sense for us to have a single point of defense. We want to have multiple redundancy or multiple redundant types of defense to protect against this kind of attack. So what happened here is you have an attacker group. They targeted specifically an administrator of MGM Resorts. And they had, for a long time, they were observing this individual. And through social engineering, they targeted not only this individual, they also targeted the individual's telecom provider, and were able to effectively conduct what's called a SIM swap attack, essentially saying that they're gonna change the administrator's phone number to the attacker's phone number. From there, they were able to capture phone communication with the swap SIM, and they conducted a social engineering attack to the support team. From there, they were able to reset the multi-factor authentication that was in place and access the cloud services with that IT administrator's stolen credentials, as well as the new multi-factor authentication token that they had. At this point, they were able to continue to laterally move throughout that environment, steal follow-on credentials, and from there, they finally laterally moved into the vCenter environment, logged in from there, and were able to launch their subsequent ransomware attack by logging into ESXi hosts directly and launching the ransomware from there. So as you can see, there's a lot of things going on here. There's social engineering, there's credential theft, there's lateral movement, there's all sorts of things that lead them to get to the point where they can finally compromise that hypervisor, launch that ransomware attack, and thereby encrypting all of the hosted VMs that are on those hypervisors. So what we're going to do now is we're going to demonstrate kind of a similar, a little bit less complex, but a similar kind of attack here. So the attacker logs in with their stolen credentials to vCenter. From here, kind of go around a little bit. They're poking around. They're going to enumerate. They see that they have a VMware ESXi 7 host. And the first thing they're going to do is go after configurations, right? In this environment, the admin did the right thing. They have SSH disabled, but that's only as good as your credentials, right? The attacker can just go in, enable SSH. So now they have SSH access to the host. And those hosts now, they're going to want to enumerate that. Here, what we're really interested is the attacker's looking for that Walter White VM that they see over here. So what the attacker, they're going to use that SSH service, stolen credentials, they're going to log in. They're going to change directories into the volumes directory, and they're going to see what they have here, move to data store, and here they see their Walter White VM. Now, what the attacker's going to do here, and I'm going to go ahead and pause the video. What the attacker's going to do here is something a little bit interesting, a little bit different from your standard kind of malware ransomware attack. Typically, what we see is an attacker, once they log in at this point, they're going to try to reach out externally, right? They're going to download a file from one of their local servers. It's going to be some kind of ransomware, whether it's like the Play or Babook ransomware, anything of that, and they're just going to launch it from there. But a smart attacker knows that there's if it's a robust defender, they're probably going to have all sorts of different security solutions that might be looking for the importation of files. So what this attacker is going to do is something a little bit interesting called a living off the land attack. Now, what that means is that the attacker is going to utilize native binaries that already exist on the ESXi host, and it's going to use those tools against the ESXi host itself to launch the ransomware attack. So I'll see if I can get a laser point here so you guys can see my cursor a little bit better. So what they're doing here, and this is kind of a longer one-liner, but it's just one line of bash. They're going to use grep to search for the specific files that they want to encrypt. From there, what they're going to do is, with those files that meet this criteria, they're going to utilize OpenSSL. All these tools exist on ESXi just by default. They're going to utilize OpenSSL to encrypt the files, right? And they're going to include some password in there. They're going to append this nuclear radiation symbol here to the affected files, showing that they've been encrypted. And then from there, they're going to use RM to delete all the old files so that the only files that exist on the host are those that are encrypted. So once they will go ahead and launch that, it takes it a second. Sorry about that. There it is. Okay, so once they launch that, you can see here that we have the VMDK and the VMX files with that nuclear radiation symbol appended to them. So when we go back to the Walter White VM here, if we try to turn that on, you can see that we now get the error message operation failed because those VMX files are now locked. When they're encrypted and can't be accessed. So this attacker pretty quickly, just via stolen credentials, enabled SSH, logged in, ran that one line of OpenSSL and all the rest of that bash one-liner, and encrypted everything in that file or everything in that directory. So now that VM is effectively useless. So it's kind of a scary attack to see how quickly that can happen, and how if you imagine that was all of the VMs in a production environment, that's a very, very bad day. And unfortunately, MGM Resorts suffered that bad day and the following consequences. So how do we as defenders, how do we protect against these kinds of attacks? Well, first and foremost, you definitely want to patch, right? As these vulnerabilities come out, VMware and Broadcom are pushing out these patches to specifically address them. And, it can be challenging, I understand it many times, but, you definitely want to patch your environments. You want to harden them to the best of your ability to ensure that only critical services are actually running on that host so that you don't have anything extraneous that an attacker could utilize against you. As well as, network segmentation. You want to ensure that these hosts are isolated from any other host in the network that they don't need to be seen by. But at Vali Cyber, we believe the best solution in this kind of environment is definitely a runtime protection. We'll talk about that a little bit here shortly. Before we get to that, let's quickly touch on the MITRE attack framework I mentioned earlier. So this is definitely a huge move in the industry, and we expect that it's going to have rippling effects on ESXi security and compliance. But essentially what happened is, in this new framework that MITRE put out, they're recognizing that this is starting to be a definite critical point of security and functionality, within production environments. So they added a bunch of techniques that we're seeing. About 34 techniques were adapted to ESXi. from their existing matrix, as well as 4 new unique techniques specifically created for ESXi. And these are things that, can help guide you, be on the lookout for what attackers are trying to do in the environment, because they mapped what they've already seen in breaches, not only that targeted them specifically, but breaches that were targeting other companies. So highly encourage you all to check that out if you get the opportunity. But kind of back to runtime security, how does this help you improve resilience and reduce risk? That's a big thing right now. We want to improve our resilience in our environments while concurrently reducing risk. Well, to improve that resilience, first off, virtual patching of a runtime solution makes it so that there's no downtime required to deploy. If you have AI detection, automated remediation, that'll help you against these kinds of zero-day attacks that you may be unaware of. And those systems that you have can be back online within minutes. So that's how you're improving the resilience. But in order to reduce that risk at the hypervisor level, we can offer things like SSH multi-factor authentication to prevent outside and even inside threats, lockdown rules, which solve vulnerabilities, and anti-tampering, which prevents unauthorized changes to your environment. And these are all things that we offer with our product Zerlock. Zerlock is a very cool product. It's the only hypervisor ransomware protection right now. We support everything you kind of see on the screen, at any sort of Linux hypervisor-based, Linux-based hypervisor is something that we are able to offer protection for. Now, it's worth noting that we do have a signed VIB with VMware. Our product is deployable via vCenter, and we are a VMware technology and alliance partner. And deployment itself, this is probably a big question for a lot of administrators. Like, okay, what does it take to deploy it? Well, it's a very low impact deployment and management. We have a containerized portal that makes Zerlock deployable in any photon-based hypervisor environment. We offer a single agent across all environments. It's a one-line deployment that will happen quickly, and it's very minimal overhead. It's only 50 megabytes of RAM and less than 5% of single CPU core. We also offer the web-based the web-based console that does allow for flexible management. And we have the API first framework for your SIEM and source solutions. We can integrate with things like Veeam, Splunk, Swimlane, because we know it's very important for defenders to sort of have that single pane of glass view. You don't want to have multiple different tabs and things you got to switch between. So we integrate all of our alerts and things like that into whatever SIEM or source solution that you are running within your environment. Now, how does it work? At this point, we're about to get into the demonstration portion of it. But what's really important here is I kept alluding earlier, you have to have that defense in depth. You don't want to have that single point of failure. And so with this product, we have a multi-layered approach that starts with SSH multi-factor authentication. From there, we go to application filtering, lockdown rules, which enable our virtual patching solutions, which I'll talk a little bit more about in depth later. And then finally, it culminates with the AI behavioral detection and automated remediation capabilities. And it does mitigate 100% of the MITRE ATT&CK version 17 ESXi TTPs when you deploy it and have it configured properly. So first things first, let's demonstrate kind of how this SSH MFA solution works. So if you look here, this is our web management console. You can see we have a bunch of hosts, we have a bunch of alerts, things that kind of help you monitor. You have your statistics. We can go over to our endpoints. We can look at all the different hosts that we're monitoring, but for this demonstration, we're going to look at an ESXi 7.0 host. We move over here and we see we've got our 3 VMs, Frodo, Gimli, and Gandalf. We're a bunch of nerds over at Vali Cyber. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to try and SSH into the ESXi host, input our password. And typically what you see is that you get access, but now something different happens, right? You're prompted for a username for Zerlock. So you input your username twice, and now you enter the code for an authenticator app. We input our code, and now we have access right there. So this is the Zerlock SSH MFA in action right here. We do support all sorts of different kind of authenticator apps, whether it's Google Authenticator, Duo, Okta, Microsoft Authenticator, anything that you're running within your environment. We do support those applications. So in the event that you run into something like a credential compromise, we have a first barrier for entry that an attacker would have to try to bypass, and that is multi-factor authentication specifically for SSH. The next thing we're going to talk about now, that next layer of the onion, if you will, is application filtering. So what this looks like,
Actually, Joe, I'm a little concerned about our time. I want to make sure we have time for some questions. How about we skip ahead to virtual patching? Because that's something that folks tend to be really interested in learning more about.
okay, we can do that. Okay, so we'll go ahead and skip ahead in the layer of the onion. I promise it's great. If you have any questions, you can stop by our virtual booth if you have questions about the other two things we're going to talk about. But so virtual patching, it's kind of a buzzword or buzzwords in the industry right now. But pretty much what it is it prevents system exploitation at runtime without actually modifying the system code. So I'll give you a real world example. Those 3 CVEs that happened earlier in March. Specifically, what they were doing is they were targeting a VMX process, right? And I'll kind of demonstrate that here in a second. But this allowed attackers to, leverage this exploit, race conditions and things like that to actually escape from a VM and compromise the hypervisor itself. Now, virtual patching is we utilize that with lockdown rules, and what that does is it allows you to actually protect these vulnerabilities without modifying anything on your system already, just by having these rules in place. So that gives you things like zero-day defense in the event of these CVEs. So any of our customers that had a proper configuration of Zerlock running at that time when these CVEs came out were already protected prior to any patches being available. Additionally, it can allow for unsupported environment protection. So if you're running legacy infrastructure that isn't receiving updates anymore, you can still get this kind of virtual patch by having protections enabled, despite the vendor not pushing those updates anymore. And then finally, if you're worried about uptime when patching isn't immediately available by the vendor, virtual patching is a way that you can protect those mission critical workloads. So I'll kind of demonstrate that here in this next video here. Specifically with an exploit that targets those CVEs that were going after the VMX process. Now, these are fine-grained access control rules. They're specifically looking for things, which in this case is, we're looking for any child process that's coming from VMX that is or non-standard. So things like if VMX is trying to spawn a shell or it's trying to create a netcat connection or anything like that, we'll have rules in place. And as long as they're configured on your host, that in effect is your virtual patching protection. So what we're going to do here, once we move over, is we're actually going to, instead of go to ESXi host, we're going to go to the VM itself on the host. And we're going to try and launch this virtual machine escape exploit. And when we do, it's unsuccessful. We go to our alerts page here, and we can see that there's an alert here of program execution. We can click on that. And when we click on that, it's going to show us a cool feature, which I'm a big fan of. It's showing that it's remediated here. When we click on the process tree, right? And we can follow this process tree to see like what caused this alert, what were the follow-on actions from that. So we see that, BusyBox, which is running on the ESXi host, it spawned a VMX process, which is okay. That's not all that, non-standard in and of itself. But then like the real problem here is that VMX itself tried to spawn a shell and execute a netcat connection to the host, which is definitely not something that we want going on. So by doing that, now we see, okay, we are protected. We don't want that behavior happening. So we're going to go ahead and just remediate that immediately. And that is Zerlock, in effect, doing its virtual patching via lockdown rules. And so the last couple of things here we'll go over quickly is you guys have seen this before. This is this kind of living off the land attack. This is our detection remediation engine. So now there's no lockdown rules in place. We just deactivated that just for demonstration. But we're going to try and launch this ransomware attack off of the ESXi host itself. Append the nuclear symbols, remove everything, and have all that encryption occur. But now something different happens. Now we're closed by the remote host. So this once again is Zerlock in action, but this time it's the AI ransomware detection engine. So as you look here, we can see that there's a lot of files that were affected. We can see that we have the VMDK files that were originally there, and then the ones that have a nuclear symbol appended to them because they've been encrypted. They all show as pending, right? If we go back over to our processes tab here, we can do sort of the same thing, right? We're seeing that BusyBox spawned a bunch of these processes. It has OpenSSL running. And so when we go over here and we try to turn on our Gandalf VM back in our ESXi host, it fails to power on because that VM is encrypted. But here we have the remediate button, or what we like to call the easy button. You just click that, You can go back over the files tab, and on the right, you see the status shows them as pending. But now it changes. It shows that the old files are restored and the ones that were encrypted have now been removed. So if we go back to our host, click on the Gandalf VM, try to power it back on, it'll take a little bit while to, a little bit to spin up. But what we are going to see here is that VM that was encrypted, by that attack that was useless to us, now in a matter of seconds, we can just go in, remediate, and now all the damage that was done is just rolled back, and we now have access to that VM. Now, for this demonstration, we made it so that we want to do manual remediation to show the function of that remediate button. But in reality, majority of the time, you can set it so that remediation is automatic, and you don't have to go in there and do anything manually. So that is the Zerlock detection and remediation engines in action. And then one final thing that we have here is kind of the bonus, is the anti-tampering engine. So if we want to search for specifically the Zerlock tool itself and say, okay, we want to kill that, we want to disable the EDR, we don't want protection, attacker has malicious ideas. Sorry, we also have protections against that, and that's our anti-tampering engine in place, and you can see that we'll remediate that behavior as well. So run short on time here. I'm going to try and wrap up quickly, but highly encourage all of you. If you haven't heard of a service called Shutdown, it's what we call Hacker Google. It shows systems that are openly accessible on the internet, that aren't protected, that have poor network segmentation. We really care about hypervisor security, so we highly encourage that take a moment. You can scan the QR codes and search to see, is your company vulnerable to any of these attacks by being publicly facing right now, and take the steps necessary to ensure that your environment is segmented properly. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop here for any questions. I imagine we have a few in the chat.
Yeah, we do. Thanks so much, Joe. That was awesome. We do just have a couple minutes. And so there was a question asking, on which layer is Zerlock working? Kernel level? Is this an additional plugin that's installed in ESXi? How exactly is this deployed?
Yeah, great question. So we don't interfere with the kernel. It's a single agent deployment, so it resides on the hypervisor itself. So it's essentially, think of it as like an application that's installed, but what it's going to do is it's going to monitor the processes that are going on within ESXi itself. And it utilizes those processes to essentially map out the activity that's going on in the host.
Awesome. And then somebody was asking how our virtual patching differs from Trend Micro.
I'm going to be completely honest. I'm not exactly familiar with Trend Micro, but virtual patching, essentially, it's kind of, as I alluded to earlier, it's the idea that you have protection without having to necessarily wait for a vendor, or in the event that you are unable to get those vendor patches in time. So
yeah,
with the VMX
but
process,
I think also Trend Micro doesn't live on the hypervisor level like we do. So
yes,
Trend Micro is
absolutely.
able to virtually patch endpoints that are connected to the hypervisor, but not the hypervisor itself.
Right. Yeah. Great point, Megan. So what you're going to see is none of the EDRs right now that are out there on the market are actually focusing on the hypervisor itself. They can do a fantastic job of monitoring and detecting and preventing the endpoints. However, like the hypervisor is kind of it's the dusty bike in the back of the shed. It's very often forgotten. So that's what we really care about, and that's what attackers are starting to go towards, because there are these robust solutions out there that are protecting endpoints. Attackers are now seeing that, and now they're starting to pivot towards, what's unprotected, what's an easy win for them, and that tends to be the hypervisor. And so that's where we come in.
Absolutely. There were a few more questions. I do want to make sure, since we're at time, there was one that I wanted to make sure everyone knew. It was asking about how support is handled with VMware. So we do have a signed VIB with Broadcom, and so we are fully supported to be on your hypervisor. If there is a support issue, come to us. If there's a support issue not related to us, you can go to VMware and still receive your support. You don't have to worry about any sort of warranty negation that happens if you choose to put us on your hypervisor, because that's all signed and sealed paperwork. Let's see, there's several other questions. If you guys would like to join us at our booth, we'd be happy to answer some of those questions. In fact, I'll put the answers to a lot of these questions in our chat window since we are at time. Thank you so much for joining us here today. This has been really wonderful. And thank you so much, Joe. This was fantastic.
Thank you so much, everyone.